Chapter 1. The wind off the Hudson cut sideways across the rooftop bar, rattling the string lights above the crowd, and Ethan Carter stood near the edge with a warm beer in his hand, watching Manhattan glitter below him like it didn't know what was about to happen. He should have known something was wrong the moment Vanessa laughed too loud at Marcus Blake's joke. It was a birthday party for one of Vanessa's coworkers, some rooftop lounge in Chelsea with exposed brick and a bartender who took 4 minutes to make one drink. Ethan didn't know half the people there. He'd worn his good navy jacket because Vanessa asked him to dress up, and he'd shown up straight from a property walkthrough in Bushwick, tired in a way that lived behind his eyes, the kind of tired that comes from spending a year building something nobody else believes in. He found Vanessa by the railing, wine glass in hand, laughing with a circle of people he half recognized. Marcus Blake stood beside her in a suit that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, his hand resting a little too naturally on the small of her back. Ethan, someone called, Priya from Vanessa's office waved him over with the reckless enthusiasm of someone 3 drinks in. Get over here, we were just asking Vanessa when you two are finally tying the knot. 5 years, right? What are you waiting for? Ethan smiled the way he always did in these situations, easy and a little shy. Waiting for her to say yes, he said. I've asked. She keeps changing the subject. It was supposed to be a joke, it usually got a laugh. Vanessa didn't laugh. She looked at him, really looked, in a way she hadn't in months, and something in her face shifted, cold and amused at the same time, like she'd been waiting for exactly this opening. Please, she said, swirling her wine. Marry Ethan, I'd have better luck marrying my student loans. A few people chuckled, uncertain. Ethan felt his stomach drop but kept his expression steady. Come on, V, he said quietly. Not the place, not the place, she repeated, mimicking his tone, and then she turned fully to the group, warming to her own performance. You want to know what 5 years with Ethan looks like? It looks like takeout on the couch because a nice restaurant is not in the budget. It looks like a 1-bedroom in Ridgewood because Manhattan is not realistic right now. It looks like watching him talk about some real estate deal he's definitely going to close any day now for the last 2 years. Vanessa. His voice had an edge now. Stop, she didn't stop. She was looking at Marcus when she said the next part, and that was the moment Ethan understood, really understood, not just suspected, that this wasn't drunken cruelty. This was a message being delivered, and he was just the delivery method. Marcus took me to Le Bernardin last week, she said, loud enough for the whole circle to hear. Ethan's idea of a special dinner is extra guac at Chipotle. I'm sorry, but at some point a girl has to ask herself what she's actually doing with her life. Somebody near the bar said, oh my God, under their breath. Priya's smile had died completely. Marcus had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, which was more than Ethan could say for Vanessa, who looked almost relieved, like she'd been carrying this speech around for weeks and had finally found an audience worth giving it to. Ethan stood very still. The city noise kept going beneath them, cabs and sirens and somebody's music from an apartment below, completely indifferent to the fact that his entire chest had turned to concrete. Are you seeing him? Ethan asked. Quiet, almost gentle. He needed to hear her say it in front of everyone because some part of him still couldn't believe it. Vanessa's chin lifted. Does it matter at this point? It matters to me. Yes, Ethan, I'm seeing him. Are you happy now? You wanted a scene, you got one. I wanted a scene. He almost laughed at that, except nothing about his body felt capable of laughing. 5 years. 5 years of her name being the first thing he thought of in the morning, and this was how it ended on a rooftop in Chelsea, wine on her breath, a stranger's hand on her back, an audience of people he barely knew watching him get dismantled in real time. He thought about raising his voice. He thought about walking up to Marcus and saying something he couldn't take back. Neither of those things happened. What happened instead was quieter and in its own way worse for Vanessa, though she wouldn't understand that until much later. Ethan set his beer down on the railing. Okay, he said, that was it, that was the whole response. He looked at her for one more second, not with hatred, not even really with anger, more like he was trying to memorize the exact moment a 5-year relationship became a closed door, and then he turned and walked toward the elevator. Ethan, Vanessa's voice cracked behind him, the performance suddenly less fun now that it had an actual consequence. Ethan, wait, that's not, he didn't turn around. In the elevator alone he pulled out his phone. His hands weren't shaking, which surprised him. He opened her contact. He stared at her photo for a second, the two of them at Coney Island 3 summers ago, her laughing at something off camera, his arm around her shoulders, both of them sunburned and happy in a way that felt like it belonged to different people now. He pressed block, then he went into her profile and deleted the contact entirely. Downstairs on the street the cold air hit him like something honest for the first time all night. He pulled up Instagram, unfollowed her. Blocked her, did the same on every other app he could think of, texts, Facebook, the group chat with her friends he'd somehow ended up in. One by one, he erased the digital architecture of a 5-year relationship. standing on a sidewalk on 27th Street while cabs blew past and a couple walked by eating pizza, completely unaware that a man's whole life had just quietly ended 3 feet away from them. He didn't cry, not yet. That would come later, alone in an apartment that still smelled like her shampoo. Right now, all Ethan Carter felt was a strange, cold clarity, like waking up from a fever he hadn't realized he'd had for a very long time. He put his phone in his pocket and started walking. He didn't know where, he just knew he couldn't stand still. Chapter 2, to understand why that rooftop broke something in Ethan, you have to go back to the beginning, to a laundromat on Bedford Avenue on a Tuesday night in early spring, 5 years earlier. Ethan was 26 then, working long hours at a mid-size property management firm in Midtown, living in a cramped studio in Bushwick that he'd chosen because the rent was survivable. He hated laundromats. He hated the fluorescent lighting and the smell of other people's fabric softener. He was reading a paperback on real estate investing, dog-eared and coffee-stained, when a woman sat down across from him with 2 overstuffed bags and an expression like she was personally offended by the dryer that had just eaten 4 of her quarters. "These machines are a scam," she announced to no one in particular, and then noticed Ethan watching her. "Sorry, I talk to strangers when I'm annoyed, it's a flaw." "No, you're right," Ethan said. "I've lost at least a jar of quarters to that exact dryer." That was Vanessa Reed at 24, sharp, funny, a little chaotic, working her first real job in marketing and still figuring out who she was outside of her parents' expectations. She had an energy that pulled people toward her, a way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room even when you knew, logically, that you weren't. Ethan fell for her within 3 conversations. Their first date was cheap and perfect. A taco truck near Prospect Park, then a long walk with no destination, talking until 11 at night about nothing important and everything important at the same time. Their first kiss happened under scaffolding during a sudden downpour, both of them laughing too hard to actually make it romantic, which somehow made it more romantic. They moved in together after a year and a half, a 1-bedroom in Ridgewood, Queens, with a radiator that clanked all winter and a landlord who took 3 weeks to fix anything. It wasn't glamorous, it was theirs. Ethan remembered painting the bedroom a color Vanessa picked out called Morning Fog. Both of them getting more paint on themselves than the walls, ordering pizza at midnight because they were too tired to cook. In those early years, Vanessa believed in him in a way nobody else did. When Ethan first mentioned wanting to get into real estate investing, actually own property, not just manage it for other people, most people in his life treated it like a hobby. Vanessa didn't. "You're going to do this," she told him one night, both of them sitting on their second-hand couch, a legal pad of numbers between them. "I don't know when, but you're going to do this and I want to be there when you do." She meant it. For a long time, she meant it completely. There was a period, around year 3, when Ethan lost his job in a round of corporate layoffs and spent 5 months applying to nearly 90 positions before landing something stable. Vanessa picked up extra freelance work without complaint. She never once made him feel small for struggling. She'd come home and find him staring at his laptop defeated, and she'd sit next to him and say, "We're okay. We're going to be okay," and somehow, coming from her, he believed it. That was the Vanessa Ethan fell in love with. That was the woman he thought he was building a life with. The change didn't happen all at once. It happened the way most things fall apart, slowly in small pieces, easy to miss if you're not looking for them, and Ethan wasn't looking because he trusted her. Chapter 3. It started if Ethan was honest with himself later. Around the time Vanessa got promoted to account manager at her marketing firm, roughly 2 years before the rooftop. Her new position put her in contact with clients who lived a different kind of life. Clients with Tribeca lofts and Hamptons weekends, and a casual relationship with money that Vanessa had never been exposed to before. She started coming home with new vocabulary, brands Ethan had never heard of. Restaurant names dropped into conversation like she'd always known them. It wasn't a crime to enjoy nice things. Ethan didn't begrudge her that. What worried him slowly was the tone that crept in whenever their own life came up in comparison. Priya's boyfriend just bought her a Cartier bracelet for their anniversary, Vanessa said one evening, scrolling her phone at the kitchen table while Ethan made dinner. "That's nice," Ethan said, stirring the pasta. "It's not a competition, I'm just saying." She didn't look up. "It's nice that some people are in a position to do things like that." Ethan let it go. He always let it go in the beginning. He told himself it was harmless, that everyone compared their life to other people's sometimes, that it didn't mean anything about the two of them. But the comments kept coming, more frequent, sharper at the edges. When he suggested a weekend trip to the Poconos, something they could actually afford, Vanessa said, mostly joking, "Can we ever just do something nice without doing math first?" When he talked about his slow, methodical plan to save for his first investment property, a plan that required patience, sacrifice, years of discipline, She started to glaze over during those conversations in a way she never used to. "You've been talking about this same property fund for like 2 years," she said one night, not cruelly, but with a tiredness that stung more than cruelty would have. "When does it actually turn into something? It takes time, V, you know that." "I know, she sighed, closing her laptop. "I don't know, I just feel like we're always waiting for something. Waiting to save enough, waiting for the next raise, waiting for your deal to close. I'm 28, I don't want to wait forever." Ethan understood the fear underneath that. He did. But he also felt, for the first time, a small cold seed of doubt about whether she actually believed in what he was building, or whether she'd only believed in it as long as it stayed theoretical. That was around the time Marcus Blake entered the picture, though Ethan didn't know it yet. Marcus was a client at Vanessa's firm, 36, sharp-suited, a real estate developer with actual money behind him, the kind of man who tipped generously in front of an audience and talked about his properties in the Bahamas like they were nothing. Vanessa mentioned him first as this insufferable client, complaining about his ego over dinner, and Ethan remembered laughing about it with her. Remembered feeling, absurdly, like they were on the same team against this arrogant stranger. He had no idea that insufferable client was the first chapter of the story that would end his relationship. Chapter 4. The texts started innocently, or at least Vanessa made them look that way. "Work stuff," she said, when Ethan noticed Marcus's name popping up on her phone more than a client relationship usually required. Client dinners that ran late. A birthday drink with the team that turned out to be just her and Marcus at a bar in the financial district. Ethan wasn't naturally suspicious. That was in some ways his flaw. He trusted too easily, gave too many benefits of the doubt because that was how he'd been raised, and because for 4 years Vanessa had given him no reason to think otherwise. But even a trusting person notices when the temperature of a relationship changes. Vanessa stopped asking about his workday the way she used to. She started making plans without mentioning them until after the fact. She got a new coat that Ethan knew from the receipt he accidentally saw folded in her bag, cost more than his entire monthly grocery budget. And when he asked about it, she said too quickly, "It was on sale," in a tone that made it clear the conversation was over before it started. There was a night about 8 months before the rooftop that Ethan still thought about more than he wanted to admit. He'd come home early from a property viewing that fell through, planning to surprise her with dinner from the Thai place she liked. He found the apartment empty, her phone forgotten on the counter, lit up with a text preview he wasn't trying to read but couldn't unsee. "Marcus, tonight was fun, we should do it again soon. Just us next time, no clients to hide behind." Ethan stood in the kitchen for a long time, holding a bag of pad thai that was getting cold, staring at a sentence that rearranged everything he thought he understood about his life. When Vanessa came home an hour later, flushed and a little too cheerful, he asked her directly, "Who's Marcus texting you about just us next time?" Her face did something complicated, a flicker of panic, quickly smoothed over into offense. "Are you going through my phone now? It was sitting on the counter. I wasn't trying to see it, but I did, and I'm asking you what it means." "It means he's a client who likes to be dramatic in texts, Ethan. It's nothing. God, I can't believe you're accusing me of something because of one text." "I'm not accusing you of anything, I'm asking a question." "Well, it feels like an accusation." She grabbed a glass of water she didn't need, a classic move to buy herself time, something Ethan recognized even then without wanting to admit what it meant. "You know what, this is exactly the kind of insecurity that gets exhausting. I work hard, I network, that's my job, I can't help it if a client is friendly." Ethan wanted to believe her. That was the truth of it. Even standing there with clear evidence in front of him, some part of him wanted so badly for the last 4.5 years to still mean what he thought they meant that he let himself be talked out of his own instincts. "Okay," he said quietly, "I believe you." He didn't, not fully, but he chose to act like he did because the alternative meant confronting something he wasn't ready to lose. That was his mistake, and he'd spend the months after the rooftop understanding exactly how much that single moment of self-doubt had cost him. Chapter 5. Ethan didn't tell many people about his doubts. He told his older brother Daniel, because Daniel was the one person who could see through him even over the phone. They met for beers at a bar in Astoria near Daniel's place, a low-ceilinged spot with a jukebox that only seemed to play songs from the 90s. Daniel was 34, an electrician with a wife, 2 kids, and absolutely zero patience for watching his little brother get quietly wrecked by a relationship he'd sensed was going sideways for over a year. "You look like garbage," Daniel said, sliding into the booth. "Worse than usual, thanks. I mean it lovingly. What's going on?" Ethan told him about the text, about the coat, about the slow, creeping sense that Vanessa was living a different life in her head than the one they actually shared. Daniel listened, arms crossed, jaw tight, the way he always got when someone messed with his family. "You want my honest opinion?" Daniel said when Ethan finished. "Not really, but you're gonna give it anyway." I'm gonna give it anyway. Daniel leaned forward. You've been telling me for a year that something's off. A year, Ethan. And every single time you talk yourself back into it because you love her, and because 5 years feels like too much to walk away from. But let me ask you something. If a stranger told you this exact story about their girlfriend, what would you tell them? Ethan didn't answer right away. You'd tell them to leave, Daniel said. You'd tell them in about 4 seconds, no hesitation. You just can't see it clearly because you're standing inside it. It's not that simple, D. It's never simple when it's your own life. That's the whole problem. Daniel softened, put a hand briefly on his brother's shoulder. Look, I'm not telling you to break up with her tonight. I'm telling you to open your eyes. You've spent 5 years building something real, the fund, the property research, all those late nights. That's not nothing, man. That's you becoming somebody. And I watch her treat it like a punchline half the time instead of something to be proud of. That's not what a partner does. Ethan turned his glass in slow circles on the table, not drinking, just needing something to do with his hands. I keep thinking about the version of her from the beginning, he said quietly. The one who believed in this before it was real. I keep waiting for that person to come back. Maybe she will, Daniel said, or maybe that person already left and you're just the last one who noticed. He shrugged, not unkindly. Either way, brother, you deserve somebody who's proud of you when things are hard, not just when they're easy. Whatever happens, don't forget that. Ethan didn't know it then, but he'd remember that conversation almost word for word, standing on 27th Street 4 months later with his phone in his hand and Vanessa's contact freshly deleted. Chapter 6. What Vanessa didn't know, what almost nobody knew except Daniel and Ethan's mentor, a semi-retired investor named Walter Higgs who Ethan had met at a real estate seminar 2 years earlier. Was that Ethan's some real estate deal he's definitely going to close any day now, was closer to real than anyone gave him credit for. For nearly 2 years, Ethan had been quietly building toward a multi-unit property in Bushwick, an 8-unit building that needed real work but sat on a block that was climbing fast in value. He'd spent his evenings after work studying zoning laws, meeting contractors for estimates, building relationships with a small lender who specialized in first-time investors, and saving every extra dollar he could scrape together. He never talked about it much at home anymore because every time he did, Vanessa's eyes would drift, or she'd change the subject to something about her own work. And eventually it became easier to keep it to himself than to share something that clearly didn't excite her the way it used to. Walter had become something like a second mentor to him, a blunt, sharp-eyed man in his 60s who'd made and lost fortunes in New York real estate 3 times over, and had a talent for spotting people who had the discipline to actually follow through. Most people who say they want this don't want it, Walter told him once over black coffee at a diner in Bushwick. They want to have already done it. There's a difference. You're one of the rare ones who actually does the boring work. Keep doing the boring work, Ethan. That's the whole secret. Everybody wants the exciting part. Nobody wants the boring part. The boring part is where the money actually gets made. 3 weeks before the rooftop party, Ethan received a call from his lender. The financing on the Bushwick building had finally been approved, contingent on a final inspection and a closing date roughly 6 weeks out. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't going to make him a millionaire overnight. But it was real, it was legitimate, and it was the first tangible proof that 2 years of unglamorous, exhausting work was about to become something. He'd wanted to tell Vanessa that night. He remembered standing in the kitchen, phone still warm from the call, genuinely excited for the first time in months, ready to share it with her. Then she'd walked in late from drinks with the team, distracted, scrolling her phone, barely looking up when he tried to tell her his news, cutting him off halfway through to complain about a coworker. He never finished the sentence. He put the news away quietly the way he'd learned to put away a lot of things that year. She had no idea what she was about to lose. She wouldn't find out for months. Chapter 7. The first 3 days after the rooftop, Ethan barely left his apartment. He'd moved out of the Ridgewood 1-bedroom 6 months earlier. A small, unremarked-upon fight about needing space to think that in hindsight had been Vanessa quietly preparing an exit into a studio in Bushwick that was closer to his work site. It had felt at the time like a temporary arrangement. Now it felt like the only honest thing that had happened in months. Vanessa called 11 times over those 3 days. Ethan knew because Daniel checked his own phone. She'd started calling him too, then texting Ethan's mother, then even messaging an old mutual friend from college, all in an increasingly frantic attempt to reach a man who had made himself entirely unreachable. She thinks he'll come around, Daniel reported, sitting on Ethan's one good chair watching his brother stare at a wall. She told Priya you always come back after a fight. Her words, "This isn't a fight," Ethan said, voice flat. "A fight is when we disagree about something. This is her ending 5 years in front of 40 people because she wanted an audience for it." "I know, man," Daniel's voice gentled. "I know," Ethan didn't cry in front of his brother. He waited until Daniel left, until the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the J train rattling past. And then he sat on the edge of his bed and let it happen, the whole weight of 5 years crashing down at once. Every memory turning traitor. The laundromat and the taco truck and the color, morning fog. And every ordinary Tuesday that had once felt like the beginning of a whole life. He thought about unblocking her. His thumb actually hovered over her contact information, still saved in a backup he hadn't deleted from an old phone. He thought about all the things he wanted to say. How could you? Why did you let it get that far? Did any of it mean anything to you? And then he thought about her face on that rooftop, the ease with which she'd humiliated him, the way she'd looked almost pleased with herself. He put the phone down. Not yet, maybe not ever, but not tonight. Chapter 8. Vanessa Reed did not, in the beginning, believe she had done anything unforgivable. She told herself a version of events where the rooftop had been an overdue release of frustration that had been building for years, not a calculated humiliation. She told herself Ethan had embarrassed her first, with his joke about marriage, that she'd simply responded honestly to a question everyone was already asking. She told Marcus 3 days after the party, over dinner at a restaurant in the meatpacking district that cost more than Ethan's weekly grocery budget, "He'll cool off. He always comes back. It's not the first time we've had a rough patch." Marcus, cutting into his steak with the unbothered confidence of a man who'd never once doubted his own charm, said, "Of course he will. Nobody walks away from 5 years over one bad night." Vanessa believed that mostly because she needed to. A week passed. No response from Ethan. Not one call returned, not one text delivered. Every message she sent simply failed, the little red exclamation point mocking her from her own phone screen. She checked his Instagram, only to discover she'd been blocked there too. She logged into Facebook and found the same thing. She even tried calling from an unknown number, and when he picked up a mistake she realized, hearing an unfamiliar area code and answering out of habit, his voice was so calm, so distant, that it frightened her more than yelling would have. "Ethan, it's me, please don't hang," he hung up. And then she learned later he'd blocked that number too. 2 weeks became a month. Vanessa's confidence, so total on that rooftop, began to develop hairline cracks she wasn't ready to examine. "He's punishing me," she told Priya over coffee, twisting a napkin in her hands. "This is just Ethan being stubborn. He's always been like this. Once he decides something, he doesn't budge." Priya, who had watched the whole rooftop scene unfold and hadn't fully forgiven Vanessa for it either, said carefully, "V, I love you, but I don't know if stubborn is the word for what happened. You told a room full of people he wasn't good enough for you, in front of the guy you were cheating with. I didn't say he wasn't good enough. You basically did." Vanessa didn't have an answer for that. She changed the subject, the way she always did when a conversation got too close to something true. Chapter 9. 6 weeks after the rooftop, Ethan met Sofia Martinez by accident, in the least romantic circumstance imaginable, a delayed elevator in a building in Long Island City where he was scheduled to meet a contractor. "This thing has been broken for 3 days, Sofia said, jabbing the button again with the particular frustration of someone who had places to be. She was maybe 30, dressed in sharp, practical clothes, a rolled-up set of blueprints under one arm. "I've complained twice, nobody cares." "I believe you," Ethan said. "I'm supposed to be meeting a contractor on 4. At this rate I'll get there by Thursday." She laughed, a real laugh, easy, unguarded, and something in Ethan's chest, dormant for 6 weeks, gave a small, surprised twitch. They ended up taking the stairs together. And by the time they reached the 4th floor, they'd exchanged enough conversation to discover Sofia was an architect working on the same renovation project. Ethan's contractor was bidding for a strange, small coincidence that would put them in each other's orbit for the next several months. Sofia was nothing like Vanessa, and Ethan noticed that immediately, though he wasn't yet ready to think about why it mattered. She talked about her work with genuine enthusiasm, not performance. She asked him real questions about his property project, and then actually listened to the answers, following up with things that showed she'd been paying attention, not just waiting for her turn to talk. "You're doing this all yourself?" she asked, over a coffee they somehow ended up getting after their meetings both ran long. "No partners, no family money, just me. And a lot of very patient advice from an old guy named Walter who thinks I'm his protege." "That's rare," Sofia said, genuinely impressed, not performing it for an audience. "Most people talk about doing something like this. You're actually doing it." Ethan felt something warm and unfamiliar hearing that, not because it was flattering though it was, but because it was the first time in a long time someone's admiration had felt uncomplicated. No comparison to somebody else's boyfriend. No subtext about when it would finally pay off, just plain, simple respect. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sofia said as they were getting ready to leave. "Sure, you've got this look sometimes. Like you're doing math in your head that has nothing to do with the conversation. Everything okay?" Ethan almost deflected. Then, for reasons he didn't fully understand, he didn't. Went through a breakup a couple months ago, he said. 5 years, still figuring out how much of my brain is still back there. Sophia nodded, no pity in her face, just simple understanding. That takes as long as it takes. Nobody gets to put a deadline on it but you. It wasn't a big moment. It wasn't a movie moment. But walking back to the subway that evening, Ethan realized it was the first time in 6 weeks he'd gone a full 2 hours without thinking about Vanessa at all. Chapter 10. While Ethan was slowly, carefully rebuilding pieces of himself, Vanessa's new life was beginning to reveal itself for what it actually was. Marcus Blake, it turned out, was charming primarily in public. In private, in the increasingly frequent moments Vanessa spent at his Tribeca apartment, a different man emerged, impatient, controlling in small ways that were easy to dismiss individually and much harder to ignore in aggregate. He criticized what she wore before events to help her, he said, though it never felt like help. He canceled plans at the last minute for work and expected her to simply absorb the disappointment without complaint, while flying into a quiet, cutting irritation if she was 5 minutes late to anything of his. He made comments light, deniable, the kind designed to leave a mark without leaving evidence about her job, her apartment before she'd moved into his orbit, even once about Ethan. He must not have had much ambition, Marcus said one night, mostly to himself, scrolling through something on his phone while Vanessa sat across from him at dinner. 5 years and no ring, no real plan. I don't know how you put up with that. Vanessa, to her own surprise, felt something sharp and defensive rise in her chest. He had a plan. He was working on a real estate investment. It just takes time. Sure it does, Marcus said, in a tone that made it clear he didn't believe a word of it, didn't care to, and considered the subject closed. Something about that exchange sat wrong with Vanessa for days afterward, though she couldn't yet articulate why. It wasn't loyalty to Ethan, not exactly, not yet. It was something more like discomfort at hearing someone else be as dismissive of Ethan as she herself had been, and not liking the reflection of her own cruelty staring back at her. The relationship with Marcus, so glamorous from the outside, began revealing its foundation was mostly performance, expensive dinners that were more about being seen than being together. Gifts that arrived with an implicit ledger attached. A man who was generous with money and stingy with almost everything that actually mattered. 3 months in, Vanessa found herself sitting alone in Marcus's enormous, sterile apartment on a Friday night while he took a work call she was fairly sure was nothing of the sort. Staring at a view of the Hudson that felt colder than it looked, thinking, for the first time honestly, about the last Friday night she'd spent with Ethan before everything fell apart. The two of them on their old couch in Ridgewood, ordering from the same Thai place they always ordered from, laughing at something stupid on TV. Nothing special about it at all except that it had been, without her fully appreciating it at the time, real. Chapter 11. 6 weeks after meeting Sophia on a bright, cold Tuesday morning in late autumn, Ethan Carter closed on his first investment property. It wasn't glamorous. There was no champagne, no dramatic music. It was a conference room in a title company office in downtown Brooklyn, stacks of paperwork. A lender's representative who barely looked up from his laptop, Walter sitting beside him in a slightly too large suit, beaming like a proud father. "Congratulations, kid," Walter said afterward, shaking his hand outside on the sidewalk. "You did the boring work, now you get to see what it turns into." Ethan stood outside the building for a long moment after Walter left, keys to an 8-unit property in his coat pocket, and felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time, not triumph exactly, more like proof. Proof that he hadn't been foolish to believe in himself all those months when Vanessa's eyes glazed over every time he mentioned it. Proof that patience and discipline, unglamorous as they were, actually built something real. He called Daniel first. "You did it," Daniel's voice cracked with genuine emotion. "You actually did it. I actually did it. I'm so proud of you, man. Mom's gonna cry. I might cry. Don't tell her yet. Let me get through the first month of tenants and contractors before we celebrate anything." "Ethan," Daniel's voice went serious for a second, "you should know this is going to get back to Vanessa eventually. This city's smaller than people think, especially in her circles. When it does, I want you to remember something." "What's that?" "You didn't do this for her. Don't let anyone, including yourself, turn it into some big revenge story where the point was proving her wrong. You did this because it's who you are. The fact that she gets to watch it from the outside now is just what happens when you throw away something good. That's on her, not you." Ethan thought about that for a long time after they hung up. Daniel was right mostly. But if Ethan was being honest, the kind of honest he was slowly learning to be with himself, there was a small, quiet part of him that felt something close to satisfaction knowing Vanessa would eventually find out. Not cruel satisfaction, just the simple human relief of being proven right about who he was after months of being told implicitly and explicitly that he wasn't enough. Chapter 12. Vanessa found out about the building the way most gossip in New York travels, sideways, through someone who barely knew the full story but told it anyway. Priya mentioned it first, carefully, over a lunch Vanessa had practically begged her to schedule, both of them sensing their friendship needed active maintenance after everything that happened. "Did you hear about Ethan?" Priya said, stirring her salad, clearly debating whether to say more. "What about him? He closed on a property, like an actual building, 8 units somewhere in Bushwick. My cousin does contracting work out there, he mentioned it. Apparently Ethan's been working on this for like 2 years. Vanessa put her fork down slowly. 2 years? That's what I heard. Vanessa sat with that for a long moment, running the math backward through her memory. 2 years ago was right around when she'd started rolling her eyes every time he brought up the fund. 2 years of him quietly building something real while she'd been telling her friends, telling herself, that his ambitions were just talk, that he was all plan and no follow-through. He never told me it was that far along, Vanessa said quietly, mostly to herself. Maybe he tried, Priya said, gently, not unkindly. I remember a few times you'd kind of cut him off when he brought it up. No judgment, just maybe he stopped trying to tell you because it stopped feeling worth it. That night, alone in her apartment, she'd moved out of Marcus's place 3 weeks earlier. After a fight about something so small and revealing she still felt embarrassed thinking about it, Vanessa opened old photos on her phone. The two of them at the laundromat, a selfie Ethan had taken the day they moved into Ridgewood, both of them covered in morning fog paint. A photo from the diner where he used to bring his legal pad of numbers, working on the plan she'd stopped taking seriously long before she ever met Marcus. She realized with a clarity that felt like grief that she hadn't lost Ethan on the rooftop. She'd lost him slowly over 2 years, one dismissive comment at a time, and the rooftop had simply been the moment he'd finally stopped pretending otherwise. Chapter 13, Ethan's relationship with Sophia grew the way real things grow, slowly, without announcement. They started meeting for coffee after work, ostensibly to discuss the Long Island City project, though the conversations wandered further and further from architecture as the weeks passed. Sophia had a dry sense of humor that snuck up on him, a habit of asking questions that made him think differently about things he thought he'd already figured out. You ever think about what you actually want, separate from proving something? She asked him once, both of them sitting on a bench in a small park near her office, coffee going cold in their hands. Like, not the property, not the relationship that ended, just what do you actually want your life to look like? Ethan thought about that for longer than the question probably warranted. I don't know if anyone's asked me that in a long time, he admitted. I got so used to building towards something that I stopped thinking about what it was actually for. That's worth figuring out, Sophia said, simply not pushing. No rush. There was a night 4 months after they met when Ethan was preparing for a meeting with potential investors for his second property. A meeting he was nervous about, more nervous than he wanted to admit, and Sophia showed up at his apartment unannounced with takeout and a legal pad. I heard you talking to Walter on the phone, she said, setting the food down. You sounded like you were about to talk yourself out of something you're clearly ready for, so walk me through your pitch. I'll be the skeptical investor. They spent 3 hours running through it, Sophia asking hard questions, pushing back where his numbers were soft, and by the end of the night, Ethan felt more prepared than he had in weeks. Not because Sophia had done the work for him, but because she'd believed without performance, without a single dismissive glance, that the work was worth doing. Thank you, he said at the door later than either of them had planned to stay. For real, nobody's done that for me in a long time. You'd do it for me, Sophia said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Ethan said, and found he meant it completely. I would. He didn't kiss her that night, it wasn't that kind of moment. But walking back to his room after she left, he understood with quiet certainty that this was what Daniel had meant all those months ago, that he deserved someone who was proud of him when things were hard, not just when they were easy. He'd finally found her, and it had happened so gradually he'd barely noticed it happening. Chapter 14, 10 months after the rooftop, Vanessa sent Ethan a message through Priya, the only remaining channel she had left, asking if he would be willing to meet just once to talk. Ethan sat with the request for 3 days before responding. He talked to Daniel. He talked to Sophia, careful to frame it honestly, not as something he was excited about, but as something that felt strangely like unfinished business he wanted to close on his own terms rather than leave open indefinitely. You don't owe her anything, Sophia said, and there was no jealousy in her voice, only honesty. But if you need to see it through to actually be done with it, I understand that too. He agreed to one coffee. A public place midday, no ambiguity about what it was. Vanessa arrived first, and Ethan almost didn't recognize the way she looked, not physically, but in her posture, something deflated in her that hadn't been there on the rooftop, where she'd stood so certain of herself. Thank you for coming, she said when he sat down. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee she wasn't drinking. You said it was important. It is. She took a breath. I've had a lot of time to think about that night. About a lot of things before that night too, if I'm honest. She looked up at him. I was cruel to you, not just that night before it, for a long time in ways I didn't let myself see clearly until they were already done. I compared you to things that didn't matter. I made you feel small for building something real because I was too impatient to see what it actually was. And then I humiliated you in front of everyone I knew, and I told myself for weeks that you'd just get over it, because that felt easier than admitting what I'd actually done. Ethan listened without interrupting, the way he'd learned to over the past 10 months, patient, but no longer patient in the way that let people walk over him. Marcus wasn't what I thought he was, Vanessa continued. But that's not really the point, is it? I don't regret leaving Marcus because of who he turned out to be. I regret what I did to you regardless of him. I threw away something real because I got distracted by something that looked shinier. And I know I don't get to just say sorry and have that fix 5 years. I'm not asking for that. Her voice wavered. I guess I just needed you to know that I see it now, all of it, and I'm sorry. Ethan sat with that for a long moment, turning his own coffee cup in slow circles, the same habit Daniel had once told him to watch out for. I appreciate you saying that, he said finally. I do, and I believe you mean it. He met her eyes. But I want to be honest with you because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfort right now. I spent a long time after that night wondering if I did something wrong. Wondering if I should have fought harder, given you more, been more exciting somehow. It took me months to understand that none of that was actually the problem. The problem was that somewhere along the way, you decided I wasn't enough. And instead of telling me that honestly, you let it curdle into something that came out as cruelty in front of 40 people. That's not something I can just set aside because you've had time to feel bad about it. I know, Vanessa said quietly. I don't hate you, Vanessa, Ethan said, and he meant it. The anger had faded months ago, worn down by work and time, and the slow, steady accumulation of a life he was proud of. I just don't want the life I had with you anymore. I've built something else, something better actually in almost every way that matters. Her eyes filled. Did you ever love me? Really? More than I should have, Ethan said gently without cruelty. That's the truth. I loved you enough to ignore things I shouldn't have ignored. I loved you enough to make myself smaller for a long time so we could stay comfortable. I'm not doing that anymore, not with you, not with anyone. He stood, leaving a few dollars on the table for his untouched coffee. I hope you find whatever it is you're actually looking for, he said. I mean that. But I hope you find it somewhere that isn't my life. He walked out into the cold afternoon light, and for the first time since the rooftop, he didn't look back to see if she was watching him go. Chapter 15. 4 months after that coffee, Ethan attended a real estate networking event at a hotel ballroom in Midtown. His second property now fully leased, a third in early negotiations, Walter introducing him to people as the most disciplined kid I've ever worked with, which still made Ethan a little embarrassed every time he heard it. Sophia was there too, on his arm this time, no longer a secret, no longer something new and fragile but something steady, something that had grown slowly enough to be trusted completely. She wore deep green, and she navigated the room with the easy confidence of someone who genuinely belonged in it, which she did. Ethan spotted Vanessa across the room, there for work, he'd later learn, her firm handling PR for the event. She looked well, healthier than she had at the coffee shop months earlier. And when their eyes met across the crowded room, there was no drama in it, no scene, just a small, mutual nod of acknowledgement between two people whose story had already ended. She didn't approach him, he didn't approach her. That in itself felt like the real ending, not a dramatic confrontation, but simple, quiet indifference. Two lives that had once been tangled together now moving in parallel lines that didn't need to cross. Later that night, walking out of the hotel with Sophia's hand in his, the city lights doing their usual glittering performance above Fifth Avenue, Ethan felt something settle in him completely. A peace that had been building slowly for over a year and had finally fully arrived. You okay? Sophia asked, noticing his quiet. Yeah, Ethan said and smiled, meaning it all the way through. I really am. Chapter 16. Vanessa sent one final message about 2 weeks after the networking event. This time directly, her number no longer blocked because Ethan had quietly unblocked it months earlier, not out of longing. Just out of a settled kind of peace that no longer needed the wall. I saw you at the event, you looked happy, genuinely happy, not performing it. I'm glad. I hope you're happy, Ethan, you deserve to be, I mean that. Ethan read it standing in the kitchen of the apartment he now shared with Sophia, a bright 2-bedroom in Bushwick, a few blocks from the building that had started it all. Filled with plants, Sophia insisted on keeping alive against all odds, and a bookshelf that held both of their books mixed together without any attempt to separate them. He read the message twice. He didn't feel anger reading it. He didn't feel the old ache either. He felt something quieter than both of those things, a kind of closure that didn't need to be dramatic to be real. He didn't respond. He deleted it, the same way he deleted her contact on a cold sidewalk on 27th Street over a year and a half earlier, Except this time there was no fever behind the decision, no devastation underneath it. This time it was simply the natural end of a story that had already finished telling itself. Chapter 17. A year later, Ethan Carter stood on the rooftop of his fourth property, a converted warehouse in Bushwick with panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline. Watching the sun go down over a city that had once made him feel invisible, and now, slowly, patiently, had made room for exactly who he'd always been trying to become. Sophia found him there, 2 glasses of wine in hand, settling in beside him at the railing. "Penny for your thoughts," she said. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, looking out at the skyline, the same city, the same lights, an entirely different life. "Just thinking about how far this view is from a laundromat on Bedford Avenue," he said. "Good far or bad far?" "Good far," Ethan said, and kissed the top of her head. "Really good far." Somewhere in the city that night, Vanessa Reed was building her own slow, imperfect path forward, carrying the lessons of a mistake she'd finally learned to stop running from. That was her story now, not his. Ethan's story, the one that mattered, was standing right beside him, steady, chosen, and completely quietly his. Because sometimes losing someone isn't the end of your life. Sometimes it's the moment you finally get your life back, the end.